Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Territory of Cinema channel. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if you enjoy our content. Today we are going to be discussing the 2013 film Riddick. The journey begins with Riddick adrift, clinging to survival on a desolate alien world, a harsh landscape that seems intent on consuming him. His previous life, marked by the brutal necessities of survival and the constant conflict with the necromongers, has honed him into a lean, mean fighting machine, a reputation whispered across various sectors of the galaxy. This new rock, seemingly empty, quickly proves otherwise. He's alone, yes, but soon discovers the indigenous fauna is less than welcoming, exhibiting a predatory instinct that mirrors the very universe he tries to escape. His immediate goal becomes clear: signal for transport. He needs rescue, or at least a means to leave this rock before he becomes sustenance for something larger. To achieve this, he needs specific resources, primarily to set up a beacon powerful enough to pierce the interstellar static. This necessity drives him to seek out a notorious criminal underworld hub, a place where desperation fuels commerce. Two separate mercenary groups eventually answer his call, drawn by the promise of a significant bounty placed on Riddick's head, a price that reflects his notoriety, a testament to his past exploits in deep space. The first ship carries a crew led by a determined woman, Santos, whose motives are layered, perhaps hinting at a personal vendetta or simply the ruthless pursuit of profit that defines many of these fringe operators. They are professional, but perhaps unprepared for the specific brand of danger Riddick represents, both to them and to the environment they must navigate. The second ship arrives shortly after, helmed by a man named Crone. Crone's crew appears more pragmatic, less emotionally invested, perhaps drawing inspiration from the stoic, results-oriented captains of old freighter lines, prioritizing the job above all else. The contrast between the crews adds a layer of tension. A fragile alliance based purely on mutual need, Riddick needs their technology. They need his cooperation, tenuous as it is. The core conflict escalates as Riddick reveals the planet's true danger. The nocturnal predators are not just beasts. They are a coordinated pack, their movements dictated by seismic shifts and the fading light. He knows their patterns, knowledge gleaned from countless life-or-death encounters, a skill set far beyond the training of these transient mercenaries. He forces the crews to work together, leveraging their high-tech gear against his intimate, brutal understanding of the environment. He essentially dictates the terms of engagement, proving that even stripped of his armies and titles, he remains the ultimate survivor. During the fraught process of activating the beacon, the inherent distrust between the mercenaries surfaces, fueled by greed and fear of Riddick himself. There are betrayals, attempts to double-cross the Furian warrior. Riddick, however, anticipates these moves, his instincts sharpened by years spent navigating political backstabbing alongside pure physical threats. He dispatches the immediate threats with grim efficiency, often turning the mercenaries' own advanced weaponry against them, a dark commentary on reliance on technology over instinct. The beacon fires, sending its signal into the void. As expected, a powerful vessel responds. However, it is not a standard pickup. The ship that arrives is captained by a familiar figure from Riddick's past, a remnant of the necromonger hierarchy, a figure steeped in the religious fanaticism and imposing structures that Riddick once shattered. This final confrontation is less about a large battle and more about a deeply personal reckoning. Riddick, having secured his ticket off this hellish rock, faces the embodiment of the life he fled, only to realize that escape is never truly final. He steps aboard the new vessel, leaving the desolate world behind, but carrying the weight of his legend and the certainty that wherever he lands, conflict will follow. His narrative arc continues, not as a hero finding peace, but as an eternal wanderer, perpetually stepping toward the next horizon of trouble. The initial ordeal on that jagged, unforgiving sphere strips Riddick down to his essence. He moves with a lethal economy, every calculated step a testament to years spent navigating the treacherous underbellies of space stations and the claustrophobic confines of enemy ships. His eyes, those famous unnerving goggles of night vision, are his primary asset here, constantly scanning the amber twilight for the telltale signs of danger. He is no longer the figurehead of the necromonger invasion. He is simply prey attempting to become the predator again. This isolation breeds a grim focus, a stark contrast to the charismatic, almost messianic fervor he briefly commanded among the necromongers, a flicker of power that the universe seems intent on extinguishing. When Santos's ship lands, the tension is immediate. Santos herself exudes a hard competence, the type forged under pressure, perhaps having seen too many captains buckle when the odds turn. She views Riddick with a calculating mixture of fear and avarice, seeing the bounty first, the danger second. Her crew members are jumpy, their expensive rifles feeling flimsy against the backdrop of primordial terror this planet offers. They are professionals of the Outer Rim, used to dealing with petty thieves and minor warlords, not a living legend whose very presence seems to warp the local ecosystem. Krone's arrival brings a different flavor of desperation. Krone carries himself with the weary authority of a man who's run scores his entire life, perhaps inspired by the grizzled freighter captains he'd likely grown up watching ply the trade routes, stoic men who valued fuel efficiency over glory. His crew is tight-lipped, focused on the mechanics of the extraction. They recognize Riddick's reputation, not as a religious zealot or a conqueror, but as an incredibly valuable piece of salvage, if they can just manage to cage him long enough. Riddick uses their weaknesses against them with chilling precision. He doesn't need to shout commands. A low growl or a significant glance is enough to direct their fire or deployment. When the monstrous winged beasts of the dark attack during the crucial hours before dawn, Riddick is in his element. He moves through the chaos, a dark silhouette against the flashing muzzle bursts of the mercenaries' weapons, seamlessly blending offensive maneuvers with defensive positioning. He demonstrates the tactical brilliance that once saw him rise from the harsh prison planet of Furia to briefly sit at the apex of an intergalactic religious empire, a background that lends gravity to his every action. He makes the mercenaries realize with sinking dread that they are merely tools in his survival plan. The betrayal, when it comes, is almost expected. It's a predictable eruption of human greed. A few of Krone's men attempt to subdue Riddick while he is preoccupied with the beacon's delicate wiring, hoping to claim the bounty uncontested. Riddick handles them swiftly, brutally, not with rage, but with the cold finality of a necessary calculation. He doesn't waste effort mourning their stupidity. They violated the unspoken terms of their bargain. Each dispatch is an exercise in efficiency, often involving him turning their own sonic deterrents or advanced tracking equipment against the attackers, showcasing a deep, intrinsic understanding of complex technology, even if he prefers the simplicity of a blade. When the signal finally cuts through the static, the relief is palpable among the mercenaries, immediately replaced by renewed paranoia. Then, the imposing, familiar silhouette of the incoming ship appears, not a beacon of rescue, but a dark omen. The man who disembarks is a high priest of the necromongers, a loyalist perhaps driven by duty or fanaticism to hunt down the apostate who dared defy their creed. This final antagonist represents the inescapable past, the shadow of the power Riddick cast aside. The ensuing confrontation is personal. It is a clash between the brutal freedom Riddick has carved out for himself and the suffocating order he rejected. By defeating this remnant of his former life, Riddick achieves not redemption, but simply a temporary clearance of baggage. He steps onto the conquering ship, not as a passenger seeking passage home, but as a force of nature moving to its next necessary storm. The desolate planet fades, but the knowledge that he is perpetually hunted, perpetually forced to fight for the next breath, remains the defining characteristic of his lonely existence. The raw, primal landscape of the alien world strips away every pretense Riddick has accumulated over his long, violent trajectory. He is reduced to the creature that first learned to kill on Furia, his instincts honed sharper than any piece of salvaged metal. His movements possess a dancer's grace married to a butcher's efficiency. He flows around obstacles, conserving energy like a seasoned traveler, conserving water in a desert. His famed UV-sensitive vision isn't just an advantage, it is the lens through which he experiences this world, seeing the thermal signatures and silent deaths approaching long before the uninitiated mercenaries register a breeze change. Santos, the leader of the first contingent, carries herself with the brittle confidence of someone perpetually looking over her shoulder. She has likely navigated the moral ambiguities of deep space salvage for years, inspired by the ruthless self-reliance preached by countless self-help gurus in the Outer Rim cantinas, a belief system that prioritizes the immediate acquisition of wealth. When she first encounters Riddick, her eyes betray a flicker of the awe that accompanies facing true notoriety. She knows the legends of the Furion who brought down an empire. This awe quickly curdles into strategic caution as she realizes Riddick is less a bounty and more a force multiplier she cannot fully control. Crone, conversely, seems molded by the slow, grinding routine of legitimate or near-legitimate hauling operations. His demeanor suggests a man who respects infrastructure and contracts, perhaps admiring the sheer organizational power the necromongers once represented, even if he never subscribed to their faith. His crew is technically adept, relying heavily on their sophisticated tracking software and automated defense systems, tools Riddick views with barely concealed contempt. They are the epitome of external reliance, which makes their reliance on Riddick's internal, biological map of the threat all the more agonizing for them. The true terror of the planet emerges under the double shadows, the planetary night, and the sudden, coordinated assaults of the nocturnal hunters. These creatures operate with a terrifying intelligence, their attacks synchronized with the atmospheric disturbances, a phenomenon Riddick understands innately. He corrals the mercenaries into the narrow valleys, forcing them to use their powerful area-denial weaponry in concert with his close-quarters mastery. He becomes the conductor of their firepower, directing the blinding light and thunder of their guns toward targets only he can truly track, transforming their expensive firepower into crude instruments of his will. He reminds them, without uttering a boast, why he briefly ruled the remnants of the very zealots they likely flee from. He understands fanaticism, whether religious or biological. The inevitable moment of internal combustion among the hunters arrives when the beacon nears completion. The temptation to simply eliminate Riddick and claim the entire reward, plus any potential salvage from his gear, proves too strong for a few of Crone's more avaricious members. Their attack is clumsy, marked by hesitation born of fear. Riddick reacts not with anger, but with the deep, weary exasperation of a teacher dealing with persistently dull pupils. He disarms them by exploiting the very software they trust, forcing their weapons to lock or overloading their environmental suits. It's a quiet, visceral demonstration that true mastery comes from within, not from a manual. When the retrieval ship looms overhead, its imposing structure is instantly recognizable to Riddick. It bears the undeniable, oppressive architecture of the remnant necromonger fleet. The man who descends is a zealot clinging to the fractured memory of his former glory, likely obsessed with cleansing the taint of the apostate Riddick. This final confrontation is deeply personal. It is the universe attempting to drag Riddick back into the very structure he tore apart to gain his freedom. Riddick faces him with the quiet certainty of a man who has already won his war against conformity. He doesn't need to preach or rally. He simply needs to survive this last vestige of his past. Once the loyalist is dealt with, Riddick boards the imposing vessel. He steps not onto a rescue craft, but into a captured weapon. He leaves the dead world behind, eyes already adjusting to the new, unknown darkness ahead, prepared not for peace, but for the next necessary, inevitable battle. The transition from the harsh, exposed surface to the metallic, shadowed interior of the captured necromonger vessel is jarring. The air inside is stale, recycled, thick with the lingering scent of ozone and fanaticism, a stark contrast to the raw, earthy air of the planet below. Riddick feels an immediate, almost physical aversion to the environment. It is too orderly, too confining, reminiscent of the prisons and military structures he has spent his life dismantling. He surveys the interior with proprietary disdain, his unique vision cutting through the gloom, instantly assessing structural weaknesses and potential threats hiding within the corridors. This ship is not a means of escape, it is merely a more advanced cage, albeit one he currently controls. His immediate concern shifts from immediate survival to long-term navigation. The crew he defeated, the remnant loyalist, was clearly operating under orders, not as a lone hunter. This implies a larger network, a persistent shadow of the empire he once rejected. Riddick understands that command structures, even broken ones, adhere to established protocols. He begins to systematically interrogate the ship's navigation and communication systems, forcing them to reveal their destination. His methods are crude but effective, bypassing complex firewalls with sheer force of will and an intuitive understanding of systems designed for brute compliance rather than subtle defense. He is looking for the central hub, the place where the surviving elements of the faith are attempting to re-establish order. As the ship jumps into the black, the overwhelming loneliness that often accompanies his victories settles in. He is an apex predator, temporarily inhabiting a territory belonging to a lesser species. There is no camaraderie in this conquest, only the cold satisfaction of having eliminated an immediate problem. He often reflects on the small, transient connections he made, Santos's brief moment of respect, Crone's weary pragmatism, and how quickly those bonds dissolve under the pressure of survival. He is intrinsically solitary, a byproduct of a race bred for combat and destined for exile. The necromonger captain's dead eyes haunt him for a moment, not out of guilt, but as a reminder of the cost of his own freedom, a freedom purchased with the constant, exhausting vigilance required to keep others from imposing their will upon him. Riddick settles into the captain's chair, a seat of power that feels inherently temporary. He programs a course that takes him away from established jump lanes, aiming for the fringes, the forgotten sectors where information is traded in whispers and anonymity is the highest currency. He knows that the necromongers, steeped in their rigid belief system, will likely seek to reinforce their dogma by eliminating the ultimate apostate. His capture of this vessel is not an end to the chase. It is merely a tactical relocation, allowing him to strike back from an unexpected direction. He is not interested in leading a rebellion or reclaiming a throne. He is interested only in ensuring that the galaxy remains a place vast enough for a man like him to simply be, unfettered by creeds or bounty hunters. The journey continues not towards a sanctuary, but towards the next necessary confrontation, another dark corner of space where his unique abilities will once again be tested against the limitations of organized society. The captured necromonger vessel hums around him, a sterile metallic cocoon that immediately chafes against Riddick's skin. He moves through the engine room, his boots silent on the grating, assessing the drive system with the practiced eye of someone who has commandeered and destroyed countless vessels. He views technology, especially the over-engineered, religiously charged hardware of the necromongers, as merely complex tools awaiting instruction or sabotage. The ship reeks of manufactured piety, a spiritual odor that always triggers a visceral reaction in him, recalling the forced devotion he once wielded and then violently rejected. This is the legacy of the faith he shattered, now placed, however temporarily, in his hands. His investigation into the ship's logs reveals a pattern, a slow, creeping resurgence of necromonger influence in the sparsely populated Outer Rim territories. They are regrouping, not with the military might of before, but through subtle infiltration, using zealots like the defeated captain to weed out perceived weaknesses in the galactic structure. Riddick sees these movements not as a grand cosmic struggle, but as a highly localized nuisance that threatens his anonymity. He is not motivated by revolutionary ideals, he is motivated by the preservation of his own isolated existence. He isolates the ship's main sensor logs, finding faint traces of recent activity near a cluster known for harboring independent smugglers and those seeking to disappear, precisely the sort of nebulous zone he prefers. During the long, cold transit between hyperspace jumps, the silence of the bridge becomes oppressive. This is the core emotional reality of Riddick, profound isolation punctuated by bursts of explosive violence. He sits, not in the command chair, but often crouched near the viewport, staring into the star-strewn abyss. He is contemplating, perhaps, the strange arc of his life, from the pitiless training grounds of Furia to the temporary adoration of the necromongers, and now, to this lonely dominion over a ghost ship. There is a fleeting memory of shared hardship, perhaps with Kyra, a moment of human connection that contrasts sharply with the cold logic of his current actions. These thoughts are quickly suppressed. Sentiment is a weakness that gets a man killed in the vacuum. He decides to veer toward the coordinates indicating the suspected necromonger staging area, a calculated risk. He reasons that striking at the head of this newly forming snake is more efficient than constantly running from its tail. He configures the ship's weaponry, heavy plasma cannons, but crucially, he leaves the primary cloaking technology intact. He is not here to engage in a fleet battle, he is here for a surgical strike. He modifies the ship's internal comm system, broadcasting on frequencies known only to necromonger remnants, crafting a message designed to lure out the highest-ranking official currently overseeing the consolidation efforts. His tone, broadcast across the dead channels, is deliberately challenging, laced with the arrogant confidence that once terrified galaxies, an echo of the creature they tried to mold, only now truly independent. Riddick knows this maneuver will attract overwhelming attention, but he trusts his ability to disappear within the ensuing chaos, using the very structure of their resurgence as cover. He prepares his favored gear, not the cumbersome armor of the necromongers, but the lean, dark fighting leathers, ensuring his visor is polished and ready. As the ship decelerates towards the target nebula, Riddick allows himself a grim satisfaction. He has taken the machinery of his former oppressors and turned it into a precision instrument of his own elusive design. He is not a hero seeking redemption. He is a survivor ensuring his continued tenancy in the darkness. The storm is coming, and he intends to ride it. The targeted nebula proves to be a dense, churning soup of ionized gas and stellar debris, a perfect blanket for concealment and chaos, the kind of environment where advanced sensors fail and raw intuition reigns supreme. Riddick guides the stolen vessel with an almost artistic control, threading it through electromagnetic interference that would send lesser pilots spiraling into gravitational collapse. His fabricated broadcast succeeded wildly. The remaining high-ranking necromonger officials, fueled by desperate faith and arrogance, responded to the perceived challenge from the renegade Furian. He positions the ship strategically near a hidden refueling outpost, a rough-and-tumble collection of derelict stations barely held together by duct tape and illicit energy taps. When the necromonger response fleet appears, it is formidable enough to suggest serious recent reinforcement, but their formation is rigid, adhering to outdated military doctrine. They expect a military confrontation. Riddick intends to deliver an ambush. The fight is swift and brutal, entirely asymmetrical. Riddick doesn't engage the main force head-on. Instead, he utilizes the stolen necromonger ship as a massive, guided missile, using its heavy plasma cannons only to clear a path directly toward the command cruiser. He strips down to his fighting gear on the bridge, abandoning the overly ornate uniforms of the zealots for the practical darkness that clings to him. When the boarding clamps engage with the enemy flagship, he is already moving, the airlock door his personal barrier against the known universe. Inside the cruiser, the atmosphere is thick with panicked prayer and the smell of burnt circuitry. The loyalists inside are disciplined, but their fanaticism makes them predictable. They fight with closed eyes, convinced of divine protection. Riddick moves through them like a phantom, a shadow made tangible. He doesn't fight like a soldier seeking victory. He fights like a force of nature, eliminating an irritant. His movements are economical, each strike designed to incapacitate or kill instantly, turning their own desperate attempts to convert him into fatal errors. He avoids prolonged engagement, preferring to use the ship's tight corridors to his advantage, funneling the fanatical guards into kill zones. He eventually confronts the presumed leader coordinating the revival, a figure even more fanatical and rigid than the last captain. This man sees Riddick not as a warrior, but as the ultimate blasphemy, a living insult to the very concept of the Lord Marshal. Their duel is less tactical and more philosophical warfare enacted with blades and fists. The leader fights with the conviction of martyrdom, while Riddick fights with the cold logic of survival. Riddick wins not because he is inherently stronger in faith, but because he is anchored in the tangible reality of violence, unburdened by illusions of eternal reward. With the command structure shattered, Riddick doesn't pause to accept surrender or claim dominion. He plants a self-destruct sequence targeting the central reactor of the flagship and sets the captured Necromonger vessel on a collision course with the main refueling depot. His goal is not conquest, but absolute disruption. As the alarms blare through the dying fleet, Riddick escapes in a small, fast escape pod, jettisoned moments before the flagship detonates in a spectacular, silent display of annihilation against the backdrop of the nebula. He floats free once more, alone in the darkness, the heat signature of the explosion fading behind him. The destruction of the remnants secures his immediate freedom, pushing the Necromonger threat back into disarray. Yet, as he checks the meager supplies in the pod, a familiar weariness washes over him. He has burned down another structure, outrun another shadow, but the core truth remains. Peace is not a destination for him. It is the brief, fragile moment between one necessary conflict and the next. He sets a course for the most obscure, information-scarce region he can calculate, seeking not safety, but simply the longest possible interval before the universe remembers he exists again. The small escape pod is a cramped, utilitarian coffin, utterly devoid of the imposing grandeur of the Necromonger flagship he just obliterated. Inside, the silence is broken only by the rhythmic hiss of life support and the occasional crackle of static from the distress beacon he refuses to activate. Riddick treats the pod's controls with the same blend of necessity and suspicion he shows all formalized technology. He isn't interested in its intended function, only in maximizing its range and survivability. He bypasses the automated navigation, inputting coordinates based on known astronomical anomalies, regions where space itself seems to fray, offering natural concealment. His focus drifts, momentarily, from immediate tactical concerns to the psychological weight of his perpetual flight. He is a man whose defining characteristic is not belonging. The Necromongers tried to harness him through rigid dogma. The mercenaries tried to cage him for currency. Both failed because they could not account for the inherent untamable wildness within the Furian DNA. This wildness, which once felt like a curse leading him from one violent situation to the next, now feels like his only true ally. He catches his reflection dimly in the curved plastic of the viewport, the gaunt features, the intense, unblinking stare, and sees not a survivor, but an echo of the outcast. The tactical victory against the revival fleet feels hollow. It wasn't a triumph over an idea, but the simple, necessary pruning of threats. He recognizes that the core weakness of the Necromongers lies in their inability to adapt. They require structure, belief, and a unified enemy. Riddick, conversely, thrives in entropy. He exploits the very gaps in the cosmos that their grand, unifying vision fails to account for. This continuous reactive pattern of existence is exhausting, but it is the only rhythm he truly understands. As the pod hurtles deeper into the uncharted void, he meticulously strips the vessel of anything useful. A few energy packs, a durable environmental sealant, and the remains of the communications gear he intends to jury-rig later. He regards the dead comms officer of the flagship, a loyalist who died shouting scripture, with detached curiosity. Such unwavering conviction is alien to him. He remembers perhaps the brief, terrifying sensation of trying to live within that structure, the suffocating need to believe in something larger than the next breath, and recoils internally. Riddick forces himself back to the present. He monitors subspace chatter using the salvaged, modified equipment, listening for any indication that the destruction of the fleet has caused a ripple large enough to draw the attention of more powerful galactic entities, the established empires that view him as an ongoing liability. He knows his legend is growing, which paradoxically makes his life harder. Legends attract eyes, and eyes lead to bounties or armies. His destination is a system known vaguely for its extreme gravitational instability, a place where starships rarely tread unless desperate or foolish. It's not a sanctuary. It's a blind spot. He plans to land, dig in, and wait for the inevitable intelligence reports on the missing fleet to go cold. He settles into a long vigil, cradling a piece of salvaged shrapnel, a dark, smooth fragment in his hand. It is his talisman against order. The journey continues, defined entirely by the space between one necessary confrontation and the next, an eternal drifting punctuated only by the sharp, clean reality of violence. The escape pod finally decelerates near the target nebula, an expanse of cosmic dust so thick it appears almost solid. Riddick switches off the thrusters, relying on inertia to carry him into the shroud. The decision to court extreme environmental hazard is deliberate. He needs obscurity more than he needs comfort. The gravitational chaos here is his shield, a region where standardized navigation software spits out error messages and disciplined fleets dare not venture. He is seeking the silence that follows the storm, the temporary cessation of pursuit. Inside the cramped confines, Riddick sheds the last vestiges of the necromonger influence. He discards the stolen uniform pieces, retaining only the essential dark fighting attire. He cleans his visor meticulously, the ritualistic cleansing of his tools a necessary psychological anchor. He is preparing not for a fight against an enemy, but for a period of absolute stillness, an unnatural state for a being forged in conflict. This enforced inactivity is often the hardest part of survival, waiting for the universe to forget your coordinates. He initiates a low-power scan, listening to the cosmic white noise. The destruction of the command cruiser has created a significant informational vacuum, a deafening silence in the established intelligence networks. This silence, Riddick calculates, gives him a window. He spends hours mapping potential landing zones on the nearest stable, uninhabited moon within the nebula, a rock likely rich in volatile compounds, entirely unsuitable for colonization, perfectly suitable for him. He is drawn to places that actively resist being civilized. There is a moment, as he drifts past the fading thermal ghost of the destroyed necromonger vessels, where a rare flicker of something akin to melancholy surfaces. It's not regret for the lives taken, but a quiet acknowledgement of the sheer waste of potential. The necromongers possessed tremendous organizational power, a structure that, had it not been so fatally bound by dogma, could have shaped entire sectors. Riddick, the ultimate individualist, can only ever dismantle. He understands the allure of order, having briefly commanded it, but his very nature rejects its constraints. He activates the pod's minimal long-range transceiver, not to call for help, but to send a single encrypted pulse, a digital breadcrumb leading away from his true location, designed to draw the attention of any lingering long-range trackers toward a false vector far off in the opposite direction. It's a classic misdirection, the kind of low-tech deception that often defeats high-tech security, a trick learned during his early, desperate years, surviving the most dangerous prisons in the galaxy. As the pod grazes the atmosphere of the chosen moon, the descent is rough, rattling the fragile structure. He braces himself, accepting the impact. When the shaking stops, the exterior view shows a bleak, iron-rich landscape, bathed in the eerie, reflected light of the nearby gas giant. It is desolate, silent, and utterly empty of intelligent life. Riddick cycles the airlock. Stepping out onto the alien dust, he pulls his hood up, melting instantly into the shadows cast by the jagged rock formations. He is home, in the only way he knows how to be, alone, hidden, and ready for the next inevitable dawn of trouble. The hunt is paused, but the predator remains watchful. The immediate priority upon landing is establishing a sustainable, invisible refuge. Riddick begins by surveying the moon's surface, his enhanced vision cataloging mineral composition and geological stability. He dismisses the few natural caves as too obvious, too easily discovered by the automated drones that galactic powers inevitably deploy after a major incident. Instead, he locates a deep fissure, partially obscured by a recent minor meteor strike, and begins the arduous process of deepening and reinforcing it. He works with tireless, almost manic energy, utilizing basic tools salvaged from the escape pod and his own formidable strength. This phase is pure self-reliance, a return to the fundamental tenets of survival drilled into him on Furia. If you need shelter, carve it from the bone of the world itself. He meticulously sets up a perimeter using passive sensors, simple tripwires and rudimentary pressure plates crafted from local rock and salvaged wiring. These are not complex, energy-intensive systems. They are analog traps designed to register a change in the environment, alerting him to anything larger than a scavenging sand rat. He despises the need for such precautions, viewing them as concessions to the persistent threat of discovery, but recognizes their necessity. The galaxy, in his experience, never forgets a legend, even if it loses track of the legend's current location for a time. Days bleed into weeks in this subterranean existence. The routine is ascetic. Scavenge minimal resources, maintain the hideout, monitor the void. During these periods of quiet, the emotional distance Riddick maintains becomes most pronounced. He doesn't miss society. He simply endures its absence until it becomes tactically necessary to re-engage. He occasionally reviews the salvaged data core from the Necromonger command ship, not for strategic insight, but to remind himself of the intoxicating, yet ultimately fatal allure of mass devotion. The sheer power wielded by the Lord Marshal was impressive, but Riddick understands that true power lies in autonomy, not adherence. One evening, while monitoring an extremely faint, coded burst of traffic, likely just opportunistic smugglers using an old Necromonger frequency, Riddick detects something unusual. It's not a direct threat, but a pattern of communication that suggests high-level surveillance targeting the sector where he destroyed the fleet. Someone, likely an independent corporate or governmental entity rather than the scattered remnants of the faith, is sweeping the debris field, looking for survivors or salvage. This confirms his suspicion. His dramatic exit was noted, and the resulting vacuum is being filled by opportunistic scavengers seeking high-value intel. This intrusion forces him to accelerate his departure plan. He cannot remain static for long. Stagnation breeds discovery. He refurbishes the escape pod, enhancing its stealth capabilities by lining the hull with layers of the moon's dense, metal-rich soil, effectively creating a temporary, low-tech, ablative shield against long-range scans. He needs a new objective, a place far enough removed from the central conflicts to offer true breathing room. He recalls old rumors, whispers from the furthest reaches of space, of an independent colony operating outside known jurisdictional boundaries, a place where being an infamous outlaw is less remarkable than being a paying customer. It is a long shot, a journey into true obscurity, and for Riddick that sounds like the next best thing to peace. He prepares the pod, his mind already focused on the trajectory, the next necessary step in his unending solitary saga. The preparation for departure is executed with the same grim efficiency Riddick applies to combat. He packs only what is absolutely essential: ration bars that taste of synthetic dust, extra power cells for his visor, and the few favored, personalized tools he managed to retain from the mercenaries' discarded caches. The meticulously reinforced hideout, a testament to his patience and raw engineering skill, is sabotaged before he leaves. He rigs a slow-burn chemical charge designed not for explosion, but for creating a massive, localized thermal plume hours after his departure. This will send any inquisitive sweepers on a wild goose chase, burning up their fuel tracing a phantom heat signature. As he pilots the jerry-rigged pod away from the moon, the gravitational distortion of the nebula thankfully masks his initial thrust. He punches the coordinates for the rumored independent colony, a location so remote it barely registers on standard galactic charts. This destination represents a gamble, trading the known threat of the necromonger remnants for the unknown dangers of a truly lawless frontier. He embraces the uncertainty. At least in a lawless frontier, the rules are transparently transactional. During the prolonged voyage, the isolation begins to press heavily. Riddick sometimes stares at the control panel, momentarily forgetting his objective, simply observing the flicker of diagnostic lights. He is a man who communicates best through action and reaction, and in the vacuum of space, both are limited. There are no targets to eliminate, no immediate lies to dissect. In these moments, he acknowledges the fundamental emptiness of his victory. Tearing down empires does not build a home. His life is a continuous process of subtraction, removing threats until nothing remains but the void. He remembers the fleeting moments of camaraderie with the mercenaries, how even Santos, the most ruthless among them, exhibited a flicker of human connection when faced with true peril. He learned long ago that humans, even the worst sort, crave some form of affiliation. He, the Furian, is fundamentally incapable of that deep-seated need, or perhaps he has simply pruned it away for survival. His evolution has led him to a peak where only solitary maneuvering is possible. Midway through the journey, a distant, powerful energy signature flares across his auxiliary scanner, a massive ship utilizing an antiquated high-signature jump drive. It's too large and too close to be random. Riddick immediately kills all non-essential power, plunging the pod into near-total darkness, relying solely on his visor's passive light amplification. He suspects it might be a faction seeking the debris field he left behind, perhaps even a more centralized military force cleaning up the mess left by the dead necromonger fleet. He holds his breath, a futile gesture in a sealed container, as the massive vessel drifts by, its hull lights blazing in ostentatious display, oblivious to the dark speck hiding near the gravitational well. The encounter reaffirms his strategy. Invisibility is the ultimate armor. He checks the pod's dwindling life support. The journey will push these meager resources to their absolute limit. Reaching the colony will require near-perfect navigation and a significant amount of luck, the last commodity he usually relies on. But as the pod finally emerges from the shadow of the nebula and the distant, unfamiliar star patterns of his destination begin to resolve on the screen, a grim resolve settles over him. He is a survivor by trade, and this bleak, uncertain trajectory is merely the next chapter in a career defined by refusing to die where the universe intended him to. He adjusts his trajectory one final time, heading toward the faint, distant promise of obscurity. The final leg of the journey into the uncharted system is a slow, agonizing test of patience. Riddick's existence contracts to the confines of the pod, every breath measured, every movement conserving the precious energy reserves. The landscape outside the viewport shifts from the turbulent colors of the nebula to the deep, unforgiving black punctuated by unfamiliar, distant stars. He operates on minimal power, his enhanced vision serving as the primary navigation tool, interpreting minute gravitational shifts and faint light sources that conventional sensors would dismiss as noise. This self-imposed austerity is second nature to him, echoing the harsh deprivations of his origins on Furia, a planet where life was a daily negotiation with death. He finds a grim satisfaction in successfully evading the larger, more powerful entities sweeping the previous sector. Their reliance on brute force tracking systems and predictable protocols makes them slow to adapt to the nuanced threats posed by a highly intelligent fugitive. Riddick views their inability to detect the subtly shielded pod as confirmation of his superiority in the realm of true survival. They are dependent on machines, while he is the machine. As he nears the coordinates of the rumored colony, the signal strengthens. Not a clear, authoritative beacon, but a fragmented, almost illicit series of transmissions. This confirms the nature of the settlement, a haven for those who have deliberately severed ties with centralized authority, a place built on mutual distrust and the explicit understanding that no one owes anyone anything. For Riddick, this sounds less like a community and more like an oversized, disorganized jungle, a comfortable environment where his own rules of engagement will apply without bureaucratic interference. He begins the final sequence of system overrides, programming the pod for a steep, unguided atmospheric entry onto the target moon. He needs a hard landing. Anything too gentle risks revealing a heat signature detectable from orbit. He strips the pod of anything that screams necromonger technology, burying non-essential components in deep space junk fields via short-burst ejection charges. He wants to arrive looking less like a powerful fugitive and more like the sole survivor of yet another cheap freighter accident. The atmospheric entry is a violent rebirth. The pod screams through the thin, unfamiliar air, the hull glowing cherry red as the dense mineral dust begins to ablate the makeshift shielding. Riddick remains perfectly calm, strapped tightly into the seat, his focus absolute. The crash is devastating, a controlled demolition that leaves the escape pod a mangled, smoking wreck half buried in iron-rich scree. When he kicks the hatch open, the air is thin and cold, smelling strongly of sulfur and inert gases. The sky is dominated by a massive, ringed planet, casting perpetual twilight across the surface. It is harsh, unforgiving, and gloriously empty. He stands on the surface, breathing deeply, feeling the familiar grounding sensation of solid, hostile ground beneath his boots. He ignores the wreck of the pod. It served its purpose. Pulling the salvaged environmental gear closer, Riddick looks toward the distant, faint suggestion of habitation, a collection of haphazard structures nestled near a geothermal vent. He walks away from the crash site, not toward civilization with hope, but toward it with the calculated intent of a predator scouting a new hunting ground. He carries only his gear and his reputation, ready to trade one form of necessary conflict for another, perpetually seeking the edges of the known universe where the price of freedom is paid in constant vigilance. The narrative does not conclude. It merely shifts the backdrop for the next necessary struggle. The 2013 iteration of the Riddick franchise, simply titled Riddick, functions less as a conventional sequel and more as a deliberate return to the gritty, survival-centric roots established in Pitch Black. Vin Diesel, who has famously championed the continuation of this character through sheer force of will and production control, strips away much of the political maneuvering and neo-noir elements introduced in the Chronicles of Riddick. This decision underscores a commitment to the core appeal of the character, a lethal predator stranded and forced to outwit both environment and adversaries. The film immediately reestablishes the essential Riddick dynamic, isolation and necessity. Having been marooned on an inhospitable alien world following his brief stint as a mercenary commander, Riddick is stripped of all external power structures. This environmental hardship is crucial. It forces the audience to reconnect with the Furian's innate survival skills, rather than relying on his inherited status or technology. Diesel's physical performance here emphasizes this austerity. The emphasis is on strained movement, primal rage, and acute sensory awareness, echoing the stripped-down physicality required in his earlier action roles, perhaps most notably in the later Fast and Furious installments where brute force meets calculated aggression. The narrative engine kicks in when Riddick realizes the planet harbors two distinct types of predatory creatures, culminating in the inevitable summoning of bounty hunters. This serves as the film's primary structural device, allowing for a calculated introduction of supporting characters who function primarily as foils or temporary tools. The dynamic between the hunters, particularly the professional mercenary Santana, and the more morally ambiguous Johns, allows Riddick to play his signature game, manipulating the opposing forces until they destroy each other, leaving him the last man standing, or rather, the last creature standing. The characterization of the bounty hunters is intentionally thin, serving the plot rather than deep exploration. This contrasts sharply with the richer, albeit brief, characterizations found in Pitch Black, where the fear was communal and shared. Here, the threat is externalized onto Riddick, making the hunters reactive rather than proactive threats, except in the moments immediately following their arrival. This reflects a broader trend in Diesel's later career decisions, where the central protagonist often overshadows his supporting cast, positioning them primarily as narrative obstacles or temporary allies whose primary purpose is to facilitate the hero's progression. The recurring motif of Riddick's dual nature, the feral animal versus the surprisingly empathetic protector, particularly concerning the infant and the eventual fate of Johns, is handled with a bluntness that eschews nuance. When Johns reveals his true lineage and motive, it provides a moment of necessary tension, momentarily echoing the complex moral gray areas often explored in films featuring anti-heroes who possess a hidden sense of honor. Johns's final decision to trust Riddick and the subsequent act of euthanasia for the dying mercenary injects a brief but potent dose of pathos, suggesting that even on this hostile world, certain codes of conduct persist, albeit warped by desperation. A key element driving the film's aesthetic is the visual depiction of the alien environment. The shift between blistering daylight and terrifying nocturnal darkness is paramount. During the day, the hunters struggle with the climate. At night, Riddick reigns supreme, his surgically enhanced eyes transforming him from a vulnerable fugitive into an apex predator. This reliance on extreme light shifts is a direct homage to the original film, functioning as a visual shorthand for the power balance. The creatures themselves, the volatiles, are menacingly rendered, serving as a constant environmental pressure that forces the hunters to rely on Riddick's unique knowledge, inadvertently validating his existence and expertise. The conclusion, where Riddick secures passage on a waiting transport, confirms the film's cyclical nature. He doesn't seek salvation. He seeks an exit strategy to return to the wider universe, hinting at future conflicts. Riddick, 2013, succeeds primarily because it understands its own limitations and ambitions. It is not trying to be sophisticated science fiction. It is a pure action horror showcase centered entirely on the appeal of its titular character as the ultimate survivor, a role Diesel seems intrinsically tied to, continuing to sculpt the character through personal investment rather than purely studio directive. The film is a concentrated dose of what fans expected: Riddick hunting, Riddick fighting, and Riddick escaping. The very act of Riddick being marooned again feels less like cosmic misfortune and more like narrative necessity, a carefully orchestrated reset button pressed by Diesel himself to recenter the franchise narrative. This derelict state, far removed from the grandeur of the Necromonger fleet, allows the film to indulge in a form of primal wish fulfillment for the audience. We watch the character who, in the previous installment, wielded political power and religious fervor, now reduced to scrounging for water and relying on rudimentary traps. It's a deliberate regression that highlights the core appeal that resonated in the first place. the anti-hero, as the ultimate underdog fighting against overwhelming odds, even if those odds are just sand and biting nocturnal fauna. Diesel's portrayal relies heavily on physicality and implication rather than extensive dialogue. His grunts, strained breathing, and the subtle flattening of his brow when assessing danger speak volumes about his ongoing internal battle against the environment and his own suppressed fury. This quiet competence contrasts sharply with the more bombastic screen presences Diesel cultivated during his tenure as Dominic Toretto in the Fast Saga, where grand speeches about family were the currency of heroism. Here, the emotion is distilled to pure survival instinct, making the rare moments of intentional kindness, such as the care he shows the wounded, feel earned and significant, not simply mandatory plot points. The introduction of the bounty hunters serves to frame Riddick's superiority, turning the film into a high-stakes hunting competition where the roles are deliberately reversed. Santana, portrayed with a sort of swaggering, almost amateurish confidence, represents the immediate, easily dispatched threat. His reliance on conventional weaponry and his underestimation of the terrain quickly seal his fate. More compelling, if only briefly, is John's, whose exploration of his own past tragedy, the loss of his son to a similar Furion, injects a fleeting layer of melancholy into the otherwise straightforward revenge narrative. This momentary connection, the shared recognition of profound loss across species lines, is the film's closest venture into genuine character depth. Johns isn't just a target. He's a man seeking closure, and in Riddick, he finds a grim mirror reflecting his own capacity for violence and survival. The climax, built around the strategy of drawing the volatiles toward the hunter's temporary base, is classic Riddick problem-solving, ingenious, cruel, and perfectly tailored to exploit the weaknesses of others. The use of flares and sound devices isn't merely tactical, it's theatrical. Riddick orchestrates a spectacle of carnage where the bounty hunters become collateral damage in his larger objective, securing transport off this rock. The quiet dignity, if one can call it that, with which Johns accepts his fate, allowing Riddick to take his necessary supplies and ensuring the safety of the transport's pilot, elevates the ending beyond a simple tally of dead bodies. It implies a grudging respect earned through shared trauma and fatal confrontation. The film's emotional core, thin as it may be, rests on Riddick's continued isolation. He doesn't seek companionship, he merely tolerates the necessary interactions that ensure his continuation. His departure at the end, leaving the desolate planet behind, carries a familiar undercurrent of melancholy. He is perpetually exiled, forever moving toward a new horizon only to find himself hunted or stranded again. This cyclical nature is the essence of the Riddick brand. Perpetual motion in a hostile universe, driven not by ideology or conquest, but by the simple, savage imperative to remain alive against all odds. It's an unvarnished return to form, prioritizing atmosphere and visceral action over the grander science fiction ambitions of its immediate predecessor. The deliberate return to the desert landscapes and survival mechanics feels like a conscious corrective undertaken by Diesel, aiming to placate a segment of the fanbase disappointed by the mythos expansion in the Chronicles of Riddick. This stripped-down approach allows the audience an unmediated view of Riddick's skill set. We see the Furion heritage manifesting not through grand pronouncements about his people, but through pragmatic decisions. Which rock offers the best vantage point, how to conserve the last drops of questionable moisture, and the precise moment to strike when the shadows lengthen. His eyes, the iconic signature of his transformation, become a tool of survival rather than spectacle. They are his shield and his sword in the perpetual twilight of this new hell. Diesel invests heavily in the nonverbal communication of competence. When he moves, there is a weary efficiency, a residue of past trauma etched into every crouch and stretch. This quietude contrasts pointedly with the overcompensating bravado of the hunters. Santana, for instance, functions as a loud warning sign to the audience. He is noisy, predictable, and obsessed with the bounty rather than survival. His death is almost an inevitability authored by his own lack of situational awareness, a predictable casualty of the environment Riddick has already mastered. He represents the external world's inability to comprehend the subtle rules governing this particular ecological chain. Johns, however, represents the sliver of humanity Riddick grudgingly acknowledges. His initial pursuit, fueled by a justifiable desire for vengeance stemming from the loss of his son to a Furion, creates a fascinating tension. It forces Riddick into a confrontation where his enemy possesses a credible personal motivation, something rarer than the standard greedy mercenary. When Johns realizes Riddick is not the generalized monster of legend, but a specific damaged entity capable of surprising self-regulation, the dynamic shifts from predator and prey to two deeply scarred warriors recognizing a shared isolation. The emotional resonance peaks not in a desperate fight, but in Johns's quiet surrender to mortality and his final act of stewardship, handing over the keys to escape. This moment is less about Riddick being redeemed and more about him being recognized as a necessary evil, capable of honoring a final request. The volatiles, the primary nocturnal threat, serve a narrative function beyond simple monster fodder. They are the constant, non-negotiable pressure cooker. Their vulnerability to light forces Riddick to manage the battlefield with a precise understanding of solar cycles, a masterful display of environmental control. The strategy employed in the finale, using the volatiles as a living biological siege weapon against the hunter's makeshift fortress, showcases Riddick's strategic brilliance. It is warfare optimized for minimal personal expenditure and maximum systemic destruction. He doesn't defeat the threat head-on, he leverages the existing ecosystem to purge his problems. The film concludes with Riddick stepping onto the transport, his gaze already fixed on the vast, uncaring cosmos. There is no sense of contentment, only the anticipation of the next challenge. His journey is not one of seeking belonging, but of maintaining perpetual momentum, the ultimate nomad of the galaxy. This ending reinforces the melancholy anti-hero trope. Riddick is fundamentally disconnected, his victories merely buying him temporary passage to a new, equally dangerous arena. The film, therefore, functions as a satisfying palate cleanser, reaffirming the character's visceral appeal while quietly setting the stage for his inevitable next confrontation with whatever cosmic powers seek to cage the creature he has cultivated within himself. The enduring fascination with Riddick lies precisely in this cyclical nature of forced exile and violent self-reliance. His existence is a constant negotiation with the universe's indifference, a stark contrast to the structured, community-driven heroism often celebrated in mainstream cinema. While Diesel himself has built an empire on themes of loyalty and found family in other major franchises, Riddick remains the consummate outsider, the lone wolf whose survival necessitates the dissolution of any budding alliances. This film emphasizes that any partnership is transactional. The moment the transaction concludes, the moment escape is secured, the bond is severed, often permanently. This theme of necessary severance informs Riddick's relationship with the elements of the planet itself. He learns to read the environment not as a living entity, but as a complex set of variables to be manipulated. His awareness of the subterranean environment, for instance, offers him refuge from the surface predators and the scorching sun, demonstrating a deep, almost spiritual connection to the underground, a dark womb from which he reemerges stronger. This contrasts with the hunters, who remain hopelessly reliant on their technology, flares, comms, and conventional firepower, all of which prove brittle or insufficient against the overwhelming alien backdrop and Riddick's intimate knowledge of it. Their failure is a failure of adaptation, a testament to the fact that on this world, physical prowess and specialized knowledge trump expensive gear. The emotional undercurrent, though subtle, flows from Riddick's latent morality. He consistently chooses not to kill immediately, instead opting for strategic incapacitation or forcing his targets into situations where they face environmental judgment. This hesitation isn't weakness, it's an exploration of his own identity following his brief foray into leadership. Having experienced the weight of responsibility as a commander, he seems compelled, even against his own predatory instincts, to offer a chance, however slim, to those who show a flicker of humanity, like John's. Yet this courtesy is immediately balanced by the ruthlessness required to use the surviving volatiles as a final weapon. Riddick is constantly walking the tightrope between the savage Furion and the man who briefly understood command, a duality that makes his solitude compelling rather than merely grim. His departure, achieved through subterfuge and utilizing the bounty hunter's own transportation, closes the chapter neatly. He doesn't look back at the ravaged landscape. His focus is already forward, anticipating the next port, the next rumor of danger, or the next desperate soul who might mistake him for an easy mark. This perpetual forward momentum is the character's defining feature. He is not running toward a destination of peace or retirement, he is running away from containment. Riddick, 2013, is successful because it honors this fundamental truth of the character. He is a force of nature best observed when he is completely untethered, relying solely on the sharp edges he carries within and without. The film is an elegant exercise in stripping away context to reveal raw, efficient lethality. The persistent allure of the Riddick persona, especially in this sparse narrative, is rooted in his rejection of conventional societal structures. He is the ultimate embodiment of anti-establishment survival, a figure Diesel seems particularly drawn to cultivating outside the predictable arcs of mainstream heroism. This film strips away the mythology of the necromongers, the religious fanaticism, and the political maneuvering that weighed down the previous installment, offering instead a purified distillation of the predator. It speaks to a desire, perhaps shared by the actor and the audience, to see the core concept, the dark-eyed alien hunter, tested in the most fundamental way possible, against rock, sun, and alien beasts. The visual language of the film strongly supports this primal focus. The palette is dominated by ochre, burnt umber, and the deep, absolute black of night. This environmental storytelling ensures that Riddick is always interacting with his setting. When he coats himself in the viscous, neutralizing mud of the bog, it is not merely camouflage. It is an act of assimilation, becoming one with the hostility of the planet to shield himself from its overt dangers. This contrasts vividly with the hunters, whose bright technological gear makes them neon targets against the desert floor, symbolizing their technological arrogance and ultimate disconnect from the world they seek to conquer for profit. The dynamic between Riddick and the volatiles deserves closer examination as a manifestation of his psychological state. He does not fear the creatures. He respects their capabilities and harnesses them. The hunt is never about extermination for sport. It is about efficient resource management. The sheer effort expended by the hunters to secure a landing zone, only to have it inevitably overrun by Riddick's strategic manipulation of the light cycle, reinforces his status as a biological anomaly perfectly suited for this hostile ecosystem. He operates on a timescale and with a set of sensory data that renders his opponents functionally blind and deaf, even during the day. Johns' final scene, particularly the moment he passes the control key to Riddick, is steeped in the pathos of shared, inescapable violence. His earlier revelation about the Furion responsible for his son's death creates an emotional resonance that momentarily bridges the gap between executioner and victim. In that gesture of passing the means of escape, Johns acknowledges a terrible symmetry. Riddick, despite being the embodiment of the race that destroyed his past, is also the only entity capable of navigating the present danger. It is an acceptance of fatalism, a nod that sometimes the only salvation lies in trusting the very monster you sought to destroy. Riddick leaves not with triumph, but with exhausted necessity. He is not celebrating, he is simply relocating the threat. The final lingering shot on the desolate landscape underscores the emptiness of his victory. He has survived this challenge, but the universe remains vast and hostile. This anticlimax is deliberately curated. It reassures the devoted audience that the character will never settle, never integrate, and never find a permanent home. His is a perpetual narrative purgatory, defined only by the next horizon and the inevitable conflict that awaits him there, making Riddick, 2013, less a definitive chapter and more a powerful, visceral reminder of the creature's enduring essence. The film's dedication to minimizing Riddick's dialogue serves to amplify the impact of his actions, a strategy that mirrors the sparse but potent script choices of early diesel vehicles, where physical presence carried the narrative weight. This contrasts sharply with the dialogue-heavy, often expository roles Diesel later embraced, emphasizing the actor's commitment to returning to the core appeal of the character as an almost purely instinctual force. We are watching a man whose language has been reduced to threat assessment and lethal execution. His few spoken lines are delivered with a gravelly economy, often laced with dry sarcasm that only surfaces when he feels utterly in control, demonstrating a flicker of the intelligence hidden beneath the feral exterior. The supporting cast functions almost entirely as a human barometer for Riddick's danger level. They are necessary distractions, antagonists whose primary role is to illustrate the escalating stakes and the unique solutions Riddick must employ. Consider the remaining bounty hunters who arrive after the initial skirmish. They represent the various facets of the mercenary universe Riddick inhabits, the greed-driven, the overly specialized, and the morally compromised. None of them possess the resourcefulness required to navigate the planet's dual threat system, highlighting that true capability in this universe stems not from accumulated wealth or weaponry, but from innate biological advantage, married to grim experience. The psychological toll of his repeated isolation is hinted at in his interactions with the environment, particularly his seemingly obsessive need to maintain his stores of bioscience, such as the compounds needed to keep his eyes functional or the basic sustenance required for long-term survival. This meticulous hoarding suggests a deep-seated fear of vulnerability, a memory of moments when lack of preparation meant extinction. Even his temporary truce with Johns is dictated by logistics. He needs the transport secured, and Johns needs his dying agony ended humanely. It is a merger of necessity, not burgeoning friendship. When Riddick finally steps onto the transport ship, presumably belonging to the hunters he has dispatched, there is an almost weary proprietorship about his actions. He doesn't sneak aboard. He claims the spoils of his victory. The ship is simply a tool left behind by the fallen, repurposed for his onward journey. This act underscores his transactional view of technology and resources. They are things to be seized and utilized, never earned through collaboration or adherence to galactic law. The film's climax, revolving around the carefully orchestrated mass slaughter, is a study in leveraging external chaos. Riddick views the predators as a renewable resource for defense. This strategic cruelty is what defines him as the anti-hero. He embraces the darkness of the situation, weaponizing the planet's inherent dangers against the intruders. Unlike heroes who fight to restore order, Riddick fights to ensure his continued freedom from any established order. Riddick, 2013, is thus cemented as an exercise in narrative minimalism, a deliberate contraction of scope to refocus the audience's attention squarely on the magnificent, dangerous simplicity of its title character. The deliberate atmospheric pressure maintained throughout Riddick serves as a constant reminder that the character thrives in extremities, a thematic resonance that fuels Diesel's personal investment in the franchise. This specific installment functions as a purification ritual for the character, burning away the perceived excesses of the middle chapter to reveal the essential engine, a survivalist operating at peak efficiency. The unrelenting alien sun and the sudden, terrifying imposition of absolute darkness are not mere set dressing. They are narrative levers used to expose the inherent fragility of conventional antagonists when faced with a being who views these extremes as occupational hazards rather than existential threats. Riddick's physical presence, emphasized by Diesel's muscular but deliberately strained portrayal, communicates a man existing in a state of perpetual low-grade injury. He isn't invincible. He is merely exceptionally durable and terrifyingly resourceful. Every slash, every leap across a chasm carries the weight of necessary exertion, subtly countering the effortless mastery displayed by Diesel in roles requiring superhuman immunity. Here, the exhaustion is palpable, grounding his power in believable physical limits that he constantly pushes. This vulnerability, however slight, makes his eventual dominance all the more satisfying for the viewer steeped in the lore of his desperate beginnings. The interaction with the remaining bounty hunters, particularly their attempts to establish a perimeter based on conventional military strategy, provides the film's most pointed critique of hubris in hostile environments. They rely on overlapping fields of fire and established signaling procedures, systems rendered obsolete the moment the volatiles begin to move with the setting sun. Riddick, conversely, uses the environment's established patterns, the sound echoes, the migratory paths of the nocturnal hunters, the geological features that offer superior cover, as his own operating system. He doesn't fight the planet. He becomes its most dangerous, self-directed weapon. The emotional payoff, centered on Johns' final moments, is a calculated concession to audience expectation for a moment of catharsis. Johns recognizes that his personal quest for vengeance against the Furion race must yield to the immediate imperative of escape, even if it means entrusting that escape to the object of his hatred. This transfer of agency is significant. It suggests that survival instinct, when sufficiently tested, overrides even the deepest wells of personal grievance. It is a fleeting moment where the universe of Riddick acknowledges the weight of past actions, even if that acknowledgement only results in a convenient means of transport for the protagonist. Ultimately, the film's success relies on its unwavering focus on Riddick as the apex survivor. He is a creature of impulse and strategy, perpetually unmoored from civilization. The promise of the ending, the open-ended escape into the void, is the franchise's enduring contract with its viewership. There will be no comfortable harbor, no definitive victory over his nature. He will simply move from one hostile environment to the next, his eyes scanning the dark, ensuring that the cycle of predator versus the rest of the universe continues unabated. Riddick, 2013, is a testament to the power of narrative subtraction, proving that sometimes the most compelling story is simply watching the best hunter hunt in his preferred desolate terrain. The cyclical narrative of Riddick is fundamentally built upon the character's relationship with trust, or the profound lack thereof. This 2013 iteration strips away any semblance of the structured hierarchy Riddick briefly commanded, forcing him back into a state where every breath is earned through aggressive independence. This echoes a core theme in Diesel's broader filmography, the powerful loner who is only loyal to a self-defined code, but here the code is brutally simple: self-preservation at all costs. His interactions with the bounty hunters are transactional to the extreme. They are not potential allies, but highly volatile, easily manipulated resources. He treats their equipment, their bodies, and their fear as temporary assets to be liquidated for his own departure. The depiction of the Furion's inherent savagery is meticulously contrasted with the calculated intelligence he deploys. When Riddick uses the mud to obscure his thermal signature, it's not just a practical survival tip, it's a rejection of the overt, technologically dependent approach of his pursuers. He communes with the basest elements of the world, becoming functionally invisible where they are glaringly visible. This proficiency suggests a deep, almost anthropological understanding of hostile biospheres, an expertise forged over countless unplanned landings across the galaxy, a background hinted at but never fully explored, allowing the mystery to deepen the character's mystique. The emotional weight, such as it is, rests entirely on the audience's ability to project meaning onto Riddick's silence. His lack of verbal response to the insults and threats hurled by the hunters reads as supreme confidence, but also as profound detachment. Why engage in dialectics when a sharp blade or a strategically placed trap yields faster results? This emotional minimalism is key to his enduring appeal. He is an action hero whose internal monologue is entirely dedicated to logistics, threat mitigation, and the maintenance of his physical form. Johns' arc, brief as it is, serves as the narrative fulcrum that prevents the film from collapsing entirely into mindless action. His recognition that Riddick shares the same brutal taxonomy of survival as the creature that killed his son forces a difficult, fatalistic acknowledgement. This is not redemption for Riddick, but rather a grudging respect earned through demonstrated effectiveness. Johns dies not because Riddick is inherently good, but because Riddick is the most effective agent of violence on the planet. The handing over of the transport key is a final, bitter acknowledgement that sometimes the greatest evil harbors the only viable route to continuation. As Riddick leaves the arid world, the lack of any celebratory flourish is telling. He doesn't claim victory, he merely completes a necessary task. The ship lifting off against the backdrop of alien stars reinforces his eternal status as a fugitive, an anomaly whose existence inherently disrupts settled systems. He is the galactic necessary evil, perpetually in motion because any place that offers comfort or stability inevitably becomes a cage, and Riddick's defining characteristic is his violent refusal to be contained. This 2013 iteration perfectly recalibrates the franchise by sanding down the edges of complexity and delivering a pure, distilled essence of the lethal survivor Diesel intended to preserve. The atmosphere of Riddick is intrinsically linked to the character's psychological landscape, a perpetual state of alert born from repeated betrayals and narrow escapes. This isolation breeds a ruthless pragmatism that governs every decision. When Riddick encounters evidence of the native predator's behavior, the patterns of their attacks, their aversion to certain stimuli, he doesn't merely observe, he integrates this data instantly into his survival schema. This intellectual acuity, hidden beneath the brute force aesthetic cultivated by Diesel's physique, is what separates him from the standard action archetype. He is not just strong, he is hyper-aware, processing stimuli at a rate that leaves his pursuers perpetually reacting to events that have already been set in motion. The visual contrast between the blazing daytime and the suffocating night is also a metaphor for Riddick's dual existence. During the day, he is vulnerable, a fugitive stripped of his natural advantage, forced to rely on meager resources and cunning. The human side, if such a concept can be applied to him. He struggles, he suffers from the heat, and his movements are deliberately cautious. Yet, the instant twilight descends, a near-perfect metamorphosis occurs. His eyes blaze, and the world snaps into sharp, usable focus. This transition isn't just a biological superpower, it is the symbol of his ability to thrive where others perish, achieving dominance precisely when fear is at its peak for everyone else. The supporting character's failure to recognize this dichotomy is their undoing. They view the planet as a temporary obstacle between them and a payout, projecting their own mercenary logic onto an environment that operates on alien, unforgiving terms. Santana and the others operate on a principle of dominance through firepower, a philosophy that proves utterly ineffective against an opponent who has already mastered the ground he stands on. They are tourists in a war zone, whereas Riddick is the indigenous apex predator, albeit one who happened to arrive via crash landing. The brief, poignant exchange with Johns before the climax carries the weight of unfulfilled possibilities for the franchise. Had Johns lived, his unique insight into Furian psychology, coupled with Riddick's burgeoning, reluctant sense of shared warrior ethos, could have added complexity. Instead, Johns's death solidifies the narrative's central thesis. In this universe, empathy is a luxury that often precedes terminal failure. Riddick accepts the keys not with gratitude, but with a detached acceptance that he has merely acquired the necessary passage. His demeanor suggests that any alliance, even one forged in the fires of mutual imminent death, is inherently temporary and expendable once its utility is exhausted. Riddick, 2013, operates as a deliberate recalibration, favoring atmosphere and streamlined action over the sprawling lore of the preceding film. It is a testament to Vin Diesel's commitment to grounding the character in his most visceral elements. The film ensures that the audience leaves with the image of Riddick staring out from the cockpit of his new vessel, not toward a future of peace or conquest, but toward the next necessary engagement. He is defined not by where he is going, but by his relentless, near-mythic ability to ensure he is never permanently caught. He remains the ultimate survivor, his story a never-ending series of necessary returns to the wilderness. The very act of Riddick abandoning the temporary shelter of the bounty hunter's gear and environment encapsulates his fundamental relationship with stability. It is an illusion to be exploited, never inhabited. He departs the landing site not by repairing the hunter's sophisticated systems, but by securing a functional transport that requires minimal knowledge to operate, prioritizing simplicity over complex dependency. This mirrors Diesel's broader career trajectory where, despite massive production values, the core action sequences often rely on brutally simple mechanics, a well-placed punch, a precise vehicle maneuver, or, in this case, a raw escape vector. The focus is never on long-term infrastructure building, only immediate extraction. Riddick's internal clock, attuned to the planet's harsh environmental shifts, dictates his pacing. He isn't waiting for rescue. He is engineering a window of opportunity so narrow that only a creature of his calibrated awareness can utilize it. The decision to wait for the precise moment when the volatiles are most active, thereby maximizing the chaos he can use as cover, speaks volumes about his strategic patience. He is willing to endure agonizingly slow progress for days, only to execute a rapid, violent climax in a matter of minutes. This dichotomy between protracted suffering and explosive action is the rhythmic heartbeat of the Riddick narrative, demanding a high level of engagement from an audience conditioned to expect constant forward motion. The visual presentation of the Furian, particularly his distinct silhouette against the alien sky, becomes an icon of untamed defiance. He is often framed low to the ground, emphasizing his primal connection to the terrain, or shown against monumental, uncaring geological structures dwarfing the human presence. This cinematography consistently reinforces the theme that the hunter is secondary to the environment itself, and Riddick is the only one who has truly learned its language. The few instances where he interacts with the ship's cockpit instruments are fleeting, almost awkward moments of necessity, confirming that the true control panel lies within his own genetically enhanced sensory apparatus. His quiet departure ensures that no loose ends concerning loyalty or friendship remain untied. Unlike many cinematic anti-heroes who might offer a final glance back or a muted promise of return, Riddick simply vanishes into the void. This emotional vacuum is intentional. It prevents any character development from anchoring him to a specific location or relationship. He exists in narrative transit, his heroism, if it can be called that, residing solely in his capacity to survive independently of external validation or aid. Riddick, 2013, is therefore a highly effective exercise in narrative contraction, reaffirming that the character's greatest strength is his magnificent, terrifying isolation within the vastness of space. The profound sense of isolation that permeates the film is not merely circumstantial. It functions as the very air Riddick breathes. This recurring theme speaks to a character archetype perfected by Diesel, the powerful outsider who finds true efficacy only when unburdened by responsibility or community. In this iteration, having shed the mantle of the Lord Marshal, Riddick is reduced to his most essential components: instinct, vision, and sheer physical will. The world of this film forces him to confront his own capacity for survival without the benefit of established lore or inherited armies, grounding the action in visceral reality. This regression appeals directly to the foundational success of Pitch Black, satisfying the audience's craving to see the alien hybrid revert to his most dangerous elemental state. Riddick's mastery of the nocturnal environment is depicted less as a superpower and more as a highly specialized, honed skill set, a biological adaptation honed through necessity rather than magic. When he moves in the dark, there is an unsettling fluidity, a deliberate economy of motion that suggests every muscle fiber is optimized for efficiency. This contrasts strikingly with the frantic, often clumsy movements of the bounty hunters who rely on artificial light sources that only serve to momentarily push back the overwhelming darkness, ultimately making them more conspicuous targets. Their flares are desperate cries for attention. Riddick's movements are silent calculations. The presence of the remaining bounty hunter crew, particularly the more pragmatic figures who follow Johns, serves to illustrate the limitations of extrinsic motivation. They are motivated by profit, a concept utterly meaningless to Riddick once his immediate survival parameters are established. This difference in core motivation creates an insurmountable philosophical gap between them. Riddick fights to continue existing. They fight to acquire something. In a hostile world, the former objective will always eclipse the latter, resulting in the inevitable, almost sterile dismantling of the mercenary unit. The brief, fleeting moments where Riddick exhibits a near instinctual protection, perhaps saving a hunter from an immediate, clumsy threat before turning on the others, are crucial misdirections. They are not signs of burgeoning morality, but calculated risks to maintain tactical superiority. To allow a less capable hunter to die prematurely might compromise a strategic position. Keeping them alive slightly longer serves a greater immediate purpose. This cold calculation denies the character easy redemption, solidifying his status as an anti-hero defined by utility rather than virtue. The transition from the dusty, sun-scorched surface to the stolen transport is emotionally muted, because, for Riddick, arrival is never arrival. It is merely relocation. He steps onto the ship not as a victor celebrating a hard-won battle, but as an engineer closing one circuit to prepare for the next. The vastness of space awaiting him offers no comfort, only the assurance of new, uncharted dangers. This film successfully reaffirms that Riddick's narrative existence is predicated on perpetual motion away from civilization and toward the next necessary confrontation, a magnificent, terrifying isolation that Vin Diesel continues to champion as the character's defining and perhaps only true home. The sustained tension within the narrative is largely drawn from the audience's awareness of what Riddick could be, juxtaposed against the circumstances that demand what he must be. Having glimpsed the possibility of political influence and strategic leadership as a necromonger Lord Marshal, this forced regression to survivalist mode highlights the tragic waste of his potential. It suggests that the galaxy, in its current state, is simply too ordered, too restrictive, to accommodate a creature whose existence defies established dominion. His current environment, a desolate, untamed planet, is paradoxically the only space where he can be his most authentic, most capable self. Diesel's physical embodiment of Riddick leans heavily into the scarred endurance of a man perpetually running on fumes, yet possessing reserves that defy physiology. When he grips the edge of a rock face during a climb, the tension in his forearm is not just muscle. It carries the implicit history of every previous fall he has barely survived. This portrayal avoids the glossy invincibility often afforded to action heroes. Instead, it champions a gritty, lived-in lethality. He is a testament to accumulated damage, where every scar is a lesson learned at great cost, making his quiet competence feel earned in increments of pain. The volatiles, in their relentless, mindless onslaught, serve as a perfect narrative mirror for Riddick's own untamed aspects. He harnesses their bestial fury, demonstrating that true power lies not in eradicating threats, but in aligning with the strongest available force. The finale, where he orchestrates their attack, is an act of environmental symbiosis, gone weaponized. He doesn't fight the darkness, he commands the creatures who own it. This manipulation is inherently cruel, yet framed as necessary survival, establishing a moral calculus that is entirely unique to his perspective, a world where tactical necessity overrides conventional ethics. Johns' final moments represent the film's most significant, albeit brief, exploration of shared humanity across ideological divides. His resignation isn't defeat, it's a recognition of superior evolutionary positioning in that moment. He surrenders his escape route to Riddick because, in the face of overwhelming alien aggression, Riddick is the only viable defense mechanism left standing. The passing of the key is less an act of forgiveness and more a cold, pragmatic handover of assets to the reigning entity on the battlefield. There is a lingering sense of regret in Johns' eyes. Not for hating Riddick, but perhaps for failing to stop him sooner or failing to understand the depth of the Furion's singular focus. When Riddick finally pilots the ship away, the lingering impression is one of profound, self-imposed exile. He doesn't look back at the planet that nearly claimed him. His gaze is already fixed on the navigation screen, calculating the next trajectory that will lead him to freedom from immediate capture, not freedom from conflict. This relentless pursuit of the next horizon confirms that the Riddick narrative is inherently anti-resolution. He is not searching for a home or a purpose beyond survival. He is merely seeking the next arena vast enough to contain his dangerous existence without immediately strangling it. This film succeeds precisely because it strips away everything extraneous, focusing solely on the magnificent, dangerous singularity of the creature himself. Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Territory of Cinema channel. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if you enjoy our content. Today we are going to be discussing the 2013 film Riddick. The journey begins with Riddick adrift, clinging to survival on a desolate alien world, a harsh landscape that seems intent on consuming him. His previous life, marked by the brutal necessities of survival and the constant conflict with the necromongers, has honed him into a lean, mean fighting machine, a reputation whispered across various sectors of the galaxy. This new rock, seemingly empty, quickly proves otherwise. He's alone, yes, but soon discovers the indigenous fauna is less than welcoming, exhibiting a predatory instinct that mirrors the very universe he tries to escape. His immediate goal becomes clear: signal for transport. He needs rescue, or at least a means to leave this rock before he becomes sustenance for something larger. To achieve this, he needs specific resources, primarily to set up a beacon powerful enough to pierce the interstellar static. This necessity drives him to seek out a notorious criminal underworld hub, a place where desperation fuels commerce. Two separate mercenary groups eventually answer his call, drawn by the promise of a significant bounty placed on Riddick's head, a price that reflects his notoriety, a testament to his past exploits in deep space. The first ship carries a crew led by a determined woman, Santos, whose motives are layered, perhaps hinting at a personal vendetta or simply the ruthless pursuit of profit that defines many of these fringe operators. They are professional, but perhaps unprepared for the specific brand of danger Riddick represents, both to them and to the environment they must navigate. The second ship arrives shortly after, helmed by a man named Crone. Crone's crew appears more pragmatic, less emotionally invested, perhaps drawing inspiration from the stoic, results-oriented captains of old freighter lines, prioritizing the job above all else. The contrast between the crews adds a layer of tension. A fragile alliance based purely on mutual need, Riddick needs their technology. They need his cooperation, tenuous as it is. The core conflict escalates as Riddick reveals the planet's true danger. The nocturnal predators are not just beasts. They are a coordinated pack, their movements dictated by seismic shifts and the fading light. He knows their patterns, knowledge gleaned from countless life-or-death encounters, a skill set far beyond the training of these transient mercenaries. He forces the crews to work together, leveraging their high-tech gear against his intimate, brutal understanding of the environment. He essentially dictates the terms of engagement, proving that even stripped of his armies and titles, he remains the ultimate survivor. During the fraught process of activating the beacon, the inherent distrust between the mercenaries surfaces, fueled by greed and fear of Riddick himself. There are betrayals, attempts to double-cross the Furian warrior. Riddick, however, anticipates these moves, his instincts sharpened by years spent navigating political backstabbing alongside pure physical threats. He dispatches the immediate threats with grim efficiency, often turning the mercenaries' own advanced weaponry against them, a dark commentary on reliance on technology over instinct. The beacon fires, sending its signal into the void. As expected, a powerful vessel responds. However, it is not a standard pickup. The ship that arrives is captained by a familiar figure from Riddick's past, a remnant of the necromonger hierarchy, a figure steeped in the religious fanaticism and imposing structures that Riddick once shattered. This final confrontation is less about a large battle and more about a deeply personal reckoning. Riddick, having secured his ticket off this hellish rock, faces the embodiment of the life he fled, only to realize that escape is never truly final. He steps aboard the new vessel, leaving the desolate world behind, but carrying the weight of his legend and the certainty that wherever he lands, conflict will follow. His narrative arc continues, not as a hero finding peace, but as an eternal wanderer, perpetually stepping toward the next horizon of trouble. The initial ordeal on that jagged, unforgiving sphere strips Riddick down to his essence. He moves with a lethal economy, every calculated step a testament to years spent navigating the treacherous underbellies of space stations and the claustrophobic confines of enemy ships. His eyes, those famous unnerving goggles of night vision, are his primary asset here, constantly scanning the amber twilight for the telltale signs of danger. He is no longer the figurehead of the necromonger invasion. He is simply prey attempting to become the predator again. This isolation breeds a grim focus, a stark contrast to the charismatic, almost messianic fervor he briefly commanded among the necromongers, a flicker of power that the universe seems intent on extinguishing. When Santos's ship lands, the tension is immediate. Santos herself exudes a hard competence, the type forged under pressure, perhaps having seen too many captains buckle when the odds turn. She views Riddick with a calculating mixture of fear and avarice, seeing the bounty first, the danger second. Her crew members are jumpy, their expensive rifles feeling flimsy against the backdrop of primordial terror this planet offers. They are professionals of the Outer Rim, used to dealing with petty thieves and minor warlords, not a living legend whose very presence seems to warp the local ecosystem. Krone's arrival brings a different flavor of desperation. Krone carries himself with the weary authority of a man who's run scores his entire life, perhaps inspired by the grizzled freighter captains he'd likely grown up watching ply the trade routes, stoic men who valued fuel efficiency over glory. His crew is tight-lipped, focused on the mechanics of the extraction. They recognize Riddick's reputation, not as a religious zealot or a conqueror, but as an incredibly valuable piece of salvage, if they can just manage to cage him long enough. Riddick uses their weaknesses against them with chilling precision. He doesn't need to shout commands. A low growl or a significant glance is enough to direct their fire or deployment. When the monstrous winged beasts of the dark attack during the crucial hours before dawn, Riddick is in his element. He moves through the chaos, a dark silhouette against the flashing muzzle bursts of the mercenaries' weapons, seamlessly blending offensive maneuvers with defensive positioning. He demonstrates the tactical brilliance that once saw him rise from the harsh prison planet of Furia to briefly sit at the apex of an intergalactic religious empire, a background that lends gravity to his every action. He makes the mercenaries realize with sinking dread that they are merely tools in his survival plan. The betrayal, when it comes, is almost expected. It's a predictable eruption of human greed. A few of Krone's men attempt to subdue Riddick while he is preoccupied with the beacon's delicate wiring, hoping to claim the bounty uncontested. Riddick handles them swiftly, brutally, not with rage, but with the cold finality of a necessary calculation. He doesn't waste effort mourning their stupidity. They violated the unspoken terms of their bargain. Each dispatch is an exercise in efficiency, often involving him turning their own sonic deterrents or advanced tracking equipment against the attackers, showcasing a deep, intrinsic understanding of complex technology, even if he prefers the simplicity of a blade. When the signal finally cuts through the static, the relief is palpable among the mercenaries, immediately replaced by renewed paranoia. Then, the imposing, familiar silhouette of the incoming ship appears, not a beacon of rescue, but a dark omen. The man who disembarks is a high priest of the necromongers, a loyalist perhaps driven by duty or fanaticism to hunt down the apostate who dared defy their creed. This final antagonist represents the inescapable past, the shadow of the power Riddick cast aside. The ensuing confrontation is personal. It is a clash between the brutal freedom Riddick has carved out for himself and the suffocating order he rejected. By defeating this remnant of his former life, Riddick achieves not redemption, but simply a temporary clearance of baggage. He steps onto the conquering ship, not as a passenger seeking passage home, but as a force of nature moving to its next necessary storm. The desolate planet fades, but the knowledge that he is perpetually hunted, perpetually forced to fight for the next breath, remains the defining characteristic of his lonely existence. The raw, primal landscape of the alien world strips away every pretense Riddick has accumulated over his long, violent trajectory. He is reduced to the creature that first learned to kill on Furia, his instincts honed sharper than any piece of salvaged metal. His movements possess a dancer's grace married to a butcher's efficiency. He flows around obstacles, conserving energy like a seasoned traveler, conserving water in a desert. His famed UV-sensitive vision isn't just an advantage, it is the lens through which he experiences this world, seeing the thermal signatures and silent deaths approaching long before the uninitiated mercenaries register a breeze change. Santos, the leader of the first contingent, carries herself with the brittle confidence of someone perpetually looking over her shoulder. She has likely navigated the moral ambiguities of deep space salvage for years, inspired by the ruthless self-reliance preached by countless self-help gurus in the Outer Rim cantinas, a belief system that prioritizes the immediate acquisition of wealth. When she first encounters Riddick, her eyes betray a flicker of the awe that accompanies facing true notoriety. She knows the legends of the Furion who brought down an empire. This awe quickly curdles into strategic caution as she realizes Riddick is less a bounty and more a force multiplier she cannot fully control. Krone, conversely, seems molded by the slow, grinding routine of legitimate or near-legitimate hauling operations. His demeanor suggests a man who respects infrastructure and contracts, perhaps admiring the sheer organizational power the necromongers once represented, even if he never subscribed to their faith. His crew is technically adept, relying heavily on their sophisticated tracking software and automated defense systems, tools Riddick views with barely concealed contempt. They are the epitome of external reliance, which makes their reliance on Riddick's internal, biological map of the threat all the more agonizing for them. The true terror of the planet emerges under the double shadows, the planetary night, and the sudden, coordinated assaults of the nocturnal hunters. These creatures operate with a terrifying intelligence, their attacks synchronized with the atmospheric disturbances, a phenomenon Riddick understands innately. He corrals the mercenaries into the narrow valleys, forcing them to use their powerful area-denial weaponry in concert with his close-quarters mastery. He becomes the conductor of their firepower, directing the blinding light and thunder of their guns toward targets only he can truly track, transforming their expensive firepower into crude instruments of his will. He reminds them, without uttering a boast, why he briefly ruled the remnants of the very zealots they likely flee from. He understands fanaticism, whether religious or biological. The inevitable moment of internal combustion among the hunters arrives when the beacon nears completion. The temptation to simply eliminate Riddick and claim the entire reward, plus any potential salvage from his gear, proves too strong for a few of Krone's more avaricious members. Their attack is clumsy, marked by hesitation born of fear. Riddick reacts not with anger, but with the deep, weary exasperation of a teacher dealing with persistently dull pupils. He disarms them by exploiting the very software they trust, forcing their weapons to lock or overloading their environmental suits. It's a quiet, visceral demonstration that true mastery comes from within, not from a manual. When the retrieval ship looms overhead, its imposing structure is instantly recognizable to Riddick. It bears the undeniable, oppressive architecture of the remnant Necromonger fleet. The man who descends is a zealot clinging to the fractured memory of his former glory, likely obsessed with cleansing the taint of the apostate Riddick. This final confrontation is deeply personal. It is the universe attempting to drag Riddick back into the very structure he tore apart to gain his freedom. Riddick faces him with the quiet certainty of a man who has already won his war against conformity. He doesn't need to preach or rally. He simply needs to survive this last vestige of his past. Once the loyalist is dealt with, Riddick boards the imposing vessel. He steps not onto a rescue craft, but into a captured weapon. He leaves the dead world behind, eyes already adjusting to the new, unknown darkness ahead, prepared not for peace, but for the next necessary, inevitable battle. The transition from the harsh, exposed surface to the metallic, shadowed interior of the captured Necromonger vessel is jarring. The air inside is stale, recycled.